Good day and welcome to another edition of One-on-One with Swope Health. I'm your host, Eric Wesson, and I want to remind everyone that Swope has 16 locations throughout the Kansas City metropolitan area to help you with all of your healthcare needs. Give them an opportunity, stop by one of their locations, and you will not regret it. Well, my guest today is the new interim superintendent of Kansas City Public Schools, Dr. Jennifer Collier. Dr. Collier, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. So glad to be here today with you.
So we're getting ready to how long is it going to be before we get that interim off of your first name?
Hey, let's hope that it happens really soon here. I'm believing for it. I'm excited about this responsibility, this challenge, this new task, and I'm ready to get rolling. And even with the interim tag, I take the role very seriously, and so I'm doing the work as if there is no interim, and I expect that the interim will be moved.
Okay. Well, we're supporting you in those efforts. So tell us about Dr. Jennifer Collier. You grew up here?
Yes, I'm actually born and raised in Kansas City, Kansas. Grew up there, graduated from Sumner Academy on that side. But after graduating from college, I came back home and I started working right away in the Kansas City Public Schools. So I really feel like I've actually grown up in Kansas City Public Schools. All of my professional career has been here. So I'm going now into my 23rd year. I've served as, I initially began as a long-term sub very shortly and then moved to a teacher role. I taught for 10 years, became an assistant principal, a principal, then director of human resources. When Dr. Bedell arrived, I was moved to the cabinet as chief human resources officer. Last school year, I moved into the role of deputy superintendent. So I moved back to the academic side of the house. And now here I am today as interim superintendent.
So you started as a sub.
Yes, I did.
Wow.
Despise not small beginnings. Yes.
Wow. So that is really the basic foundation when it gets to education, is being a substitute.
Absolutely.
So when you look around at the public school system, and let's be specific with KCPS, you guys got accreditation.
Yes, we did.
So what are some of the issues that you all still have?
Well, accreditation does not change everything. Unfortunately, we still face challenges. I think one of the most important areas of focus for us is, while we have regained our accreditation, we still have so much more work to do in terms of academics, and particularly around literacy. And that will be something that you hear me talking a lot about this school year. Us having a laser focus on literacy, we have to ensure that the children that we serve, when they leave our schools, they're leaving as readers, writers, and effective communicators. That is a non-negotiable. There's no way around it. We can do a lot of great things, but if we're not achieving that, then we're doing them a disservice. And so that is one of the areas of focus for me as a leader, to ensure that our students are moving, we're moving the needle academically for them in the area of literacy, but also in math. But we're starting with that primary focus on literacy. But then, of course, there are other things that our students are dealing with. We're dealing with high numbers of homelessness, and we were dealing with that prior to the pandemic, and we're seeing that is continuing. In many ways, there's also high mobility rates in our school systems, where children and families are moving from various neighborhoods, which creates instability in education services as well. And so we have a lot to do to combat that, to make sure that we're providing levels of consistency from school to school as they're moving in and out of our school system or between schools, that we have structures and systems in place to make sure that we're able to fully and quickly integrate students as they're making their way into their new educational setting. So we're still dealing with issues around, once again, homelessness, around high mobility. And then I think coming out of the pandemic, just noticing the high levels of anxiety and stress that everyone is feeling. And it's not just students. We're also seeing it with staff members and family members as well. And so we are definitely, we've looked at how we can increase our social emotional supports for our children and for our staff members in our schools. And we're being more intentional, even with staff, around how we can support them in the social emotional wellness area. Because what I always say is that you can't pour from an empty cup. It's going to be difficult for our staff members, our principals, our teachers, and others to serve our students well if they're not in a good place, if they're not well, if they're not whole. So we have to make sure we're tending to the adults as well who are directly impacting our children.
You know, you bring up a lot of interesting points, and you kind of got ahead of my cheat sheet.
I'm sorry. I do that sometimes.
But you covered a lot of things that are issues. But I remember when I was growing up, and as I got older, my third and fourth grade teacher, Miss Rosa James, God rest her soul,
Yes.
she told me and taught me that there's nothing that you can do in life and if you can't read. And so that was always, reading was fundamental. That was the foundation. You got to be able to read. If you can't read, you can't do anything. Even if you wanted to build something, you had to be able to read the directions in order to do it. So with that said, how are our kids really doing in reading? And what was the gap that was created with the COVID pandemic situation?
Well, in reading, we have made small incremental gains over the last few years. But when we look at how our students are performing against their peers across the state, we can see that there are still some major gaps there. I think the last data that we have, it shows about 24% of our students are performing at a proficient level in reading. And so when you think about that, less than a quarter of our students, clearly there's more work to do. That's why I say we've regained our accreditation, but it's not time for us to celebrate and rest on our laurels. It's time for us to roll up our sleeves and use this momentum to really continue to push forward in this area of literacy. And so our team, we've been looking at the data. We've been looking at areas of concern, levels. We've looked at our subgroups because that's important to look at. So when you look at the data, you can't just look at it as a whole. You also have to drill down and say, are there certain communities within our school system or student demographics that we are not meeting their needs as well? And there are a couple of areas of demographics that I've looked at and I've noticed, particularly our Black students. They are not performing as well as their white and Hispanic counterparts. And so when I look at that data, that's an area where we have to make sure we are laser focused on for all of our children, but for our Black students that aren't performing as well as our new Americans, those who are coming to America English as a second language. Those two particular demographics, I looking at the data, I can see are not performing as well or not growing as quickly. And so this is an area of focus for us. But once again, when you look at 24% overall, we really have to look at all of our children, honestly, because that's just unacceptable when only 24% of the students are performing at grade level in the area of reading. And as you said, reading is the foundation of all other learning. And we know that if our students are not readers, if they're not effective in areas of literacy, that is going to negatively impact the trajectory of their lives. You and I are sitting here today because somebody made sure that we were able to read, to write, to speak effectively. And so we owe that to our children.
So why is it that you think Black children are behind white children and even Hispanic children when it comes to areas of education? Why is that?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, and this is my opinion, socioeconomics. I think a lot of times, depending on your socioeconomic status, the home that you're in, the neighborhood, you're sometimes exposed to language or you're not. And I think for more, from children that come from more affluent homes, they are sitting at breakfast tables, dinner tables, hearing conversations from parents that are professional, that are talking about all sorts of things, having all kinds of experiences. And really, every encounter a child has is a learning experience. So when you're sitting there at the dinner table and perhaps you have two professional parents who are discussing what happened at work, you're learning, you're picking up the vocabulary, you're understanding the importance of dynamics of relationships. There's a lot of even what we would consider non-academic learning that's happening that can be leveraged in the classroom. Many of our children that are coming from lower socioeconomic status communities, aren't always afforded those kind of opportunities. They aren't hearing language in the same way. So oftentimes when they come into the classroom, those things have to be taught, whereas other children are already coming with that economy of language. And many of our children from, once again, I don't really like to tie race to it because I think it has a lot to do with socioeconomics. If they're not exposed to that, then they're not coming with that already. And that's something that has to be taught once they arrive in the school setting. And I think that's what puts our children behind, that they're starting already behind. They're not starting at the same place as some of their more affluent counterparts.
And that's just mind-boggling and interesting. And I guess it's like you said, social and economic things. So if the parents aren't putting that focus or that emphasis there, then the children don't pick that up. So where do we start? Do we start in the third grade? Do we start at preschool?
Oh,
pre-K?
it starts in preschool.
Yeah.
I think that pre-K learning is so important. Trying to get the students in as early as we can so that we can start to prepare them and make sure that they're on track to be readers. They're learning vocabulary early so that when they start that kindergarten year, they're in a much better position to be successful. So I think that pre-K is very important. I would love to see universal pre-K in our community. I think is necessary, really to set our students up for success.
So let's also add into this conversation violence. Is the violence kind of subsiding in the schools? You take the neighborhood and community violence into the classroom, and how do you separate those depending on the zip codes in the schools where the kids go to school? Because it kind of seems like our kids are like, the violence is a norm. We don't go through a period where we allow kids to express how they feel about it. It's just business as usual. Does that have any impact on it?
I certainly believe so. I think all of us are products of our experiences and our exposure. And unfortunately, when there is violence in the community and that's the norm, that inevitably makes its way into schools. And I don't think you can just fully separate it. Separate what happens at home and in the neighborhood from what happens in the school setting. And so I think that's why it's important for us to really focus on some character education, which we're doing, which is tied to our literacy effort this year. Every month we're focusing on a different social, emotional, or interpersonal skill. Helping our children understand what it means to have a sense of belonging, welcoming others. But we're also going to be looking at other character traits throughout the year. But also for our middle school students in particular, we are partnering with the Center for Conflict Resolution on training for our children. We've had training for our staff on conflict resolution, but now we're going to do this with our students directly, help equipping them with the skills to, number one, know who the trusted adults are in your building, knowing how to communicate if there are concerns, learning how to de-escalate situations, having conversations with one another and not resorting to violence. I think a lot of things have to be taught because you can't just take it for granted that everyone's coming to that school setting with the same experiences or understandings or values. And so we have to make sure that we kind of set the playing field and make sure that everyone understands who we are as a KCPS school system, how we operate, but most importantly, equip our students with the skills to be able to be successful in that area.
So you think it'll work? Or is this something, conflict resolution, is this something they should be learning in pre-K? And then, because by the time we get into high school, that ball is rolling. And if we haven't done something about it at a younger age, then what's the point in doing it?
I honestly think you're right. I think it has to be a joint effort. Like, I don't think it's something that schools can do alone, which is why we're also going to be emphasizing more our partnerships with the community, but also families. And I think that's been one area we've not taken advantage of enough, is really looking, how do we leverage the partnership with families? And I think some families have felt left out or closed out of the educational process, whether that's intentional or not. But we're being intentional this year to make sure our families know and understand that they are partners in this work with us, because we can't do it alone. We need them to join us in this, and we need community partners to help us with the education around how to diffuse a conflict, or how to de-escalate a situation that has been heightened with frustration and anger. We're going to need support around that. And honestly, I don't know that there's a silver bullet. You know, like I don't know that it's one thing that's going to do it. So I can't just say that the conflict resolution training will resolve all issues, but I do think it can make an impact. And as we continue to layer on supports for children, we continue to make sure we're working in partnership with the families and the community. I think once again, we'll be in a better position to support our children in this area.
So do you have a teacher shortage? I know KCK is like they have a teacher shortage there. To be a substitute, all you have to do is have a high school education. Are you having the same issue with
we are
public schools?
Yes, we are seeing the same issues this year. In the last few years, we have made some really great gains and done great work in the area of staffing. I know when I first moved into human resources 7 years ago, I was shocked to find out that starting the school year, we would begin with approximately 50 to 60 vacancies every year. And that's something I didn't see at the school level. But when I moved to the district level, I was just surprised to learn that was the norm. And from what I'm understanding, that's a norm for many urban school districts, which is sad because I feel like students in urban school districts oftentimes are the children that need strong teachers the most. And so to know that we don't always have that available for our children is very concerning. But through a lot of efforts that we did in the Human Resources Department, we cut those numbers down significantly. We went from several years ago, beginning the year with 20 vacancies. We decreased it to 20. Then we went to 13 in the following year. Then we went to 7 in the next year. And then during the pandemic year, we only had 3. This school year, I think we started the school year with 27. And while that's a lot more than what we've had in the past, when I hear other school districts' numbers, I realize how blessed we actually are to only have 27. And we are still continuing to make hires. But it is a challenge. But I think this whole teacher shortage, this has been a long-term issue for not just our district and not just for our state, nationwide. When you look at the data, I did a report to our board and community several years ago when I was a chief human resource officer, and I pulled the data that showed that over decades, 10 years apart, you could see how the numbers of freshmen going into schools of education were declining like over the last 50 years. So this didn't just start. This has been ongoing, and fewer students are actually choosing education as a profession. But I think a lot has to do with the way we discuss education, the way we pay educators. Many students don't see it as a field worth going into. And it's so important because it is what supplies folks for every other field that's out there.
Right.
Like the quality of our education is going to impact everything around us. And very few people want to go into education. So I think that as a community, as a state, a city, state, as a country, we have got to start elevating the field of education. And we're doing some things within our school system to make that happen. We're partnering with some local universities to provide scholarships for our students that choose education. When our students select education, when they're signing days for athletes, we're going to have signing days for the students that go into education, have a big celebration for them. We're also having them sign letters of intent when they leave us to say, when you graduate with your degree, you have a job here in KCPS. We're trying to do things to really elevate education so that at the very least, we can bring our own students back into KCPS. I mean, because who better to serve in our schools than those who have matriculated through those hallways and those classrooms and live in the neighborhood and understand the experiences of the students, because some of them are their own family members, nieces, nephews, little brothers, sisters. They understand what our children are experiencing because they've lived it. And so we want to bring our children back into our schools after they've obtained their education degree, and we're doing things to support them in that process.
And you know, what's interesting in the transition with all of the things that you say, as it just kind of seems like we're in a point now where we just want adult bodies in the classroom and not people that specify or specifically deal with education. And that kind of worries me. You know, you're just taking whatever just to get somebody in there. And that really bothers me, because I think there should still be a standard of what is acceptable when they're in the classroom teaching our future.
Yes.
So I hope we get over the hump. And that sounds like a great idea that you have as far as getting scholarships to people, to get them to come back and teach in the public schools. And the state now is giving them a little more money.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And that, I think that impacted state districts that were probably more rural districts with the increase in the teacher pay. It didn't impact KCPS because we were already over that threshold. But even still, we have to do better as a state in terms of how we pay our teachers, because it is very challenging to compete with some of the larger urban school systems like Houston or New York and Chicago, who pay significantly more in those states for those larger urban districts. It's really hard to compete with for teachers when we're paying $15,000-$20,000 less than them starting pay. So we have to do better as a state. The state did make some progress, but there's still a ways to go. Absolutely.
You're listening to One-on-One with Swope Health. My guest today is Dr. Jennifer Collier. She is the interim, and we're going to take that interim off as soon as the board gets itself together, and we're going to have her as our superintendent of public schools. And when I say we support, I mean the entire community. I haven't heard anyone say, no, she's not the one, or no, we need to do a search, but she grew up here. She grew up in the district, so people are real fond of you. So that's a good thing.
Honestly, and I have felt the support. I have. I mean, I feel like this community has really wrapped their arms around me and our school system, and that was really important to me. With the departure of Dr. Bedell, he was a phenomenal leader, and I feel like a lot of people came to the table to look at and to hear KCPS in a new way, and began to really take us seriously and to really begin to support us in ways that were making a difference. And so my hope was, as he was leaving, is that would continue, because number one, our children need it. You know, our children deserve it. They deserve this community to wrap our arms around them and to provide them the best educational experience that we can. And so I'm really excited about the way this community has continued that momentum. And I feel the support, our schools feel the support, our staff, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who's continued that, because once again, it has to be about our children. They have to be the center and our why behind what we do. And when we do that as a community, then we know that we're on the right track, we're heading in the right direction. And once again, we are positioning our students for success, and success for them means success for their homes, for their communities, for their neighborhoods, and for this city.
So when we talk about health, because we talked about the homelessness, kids call it couch surfing, from moving from one house to another, or one relative's house to another. So what are you hearing and seeing as far as health concern? Is juvenile diabetes a problem? And we talked about the stress from coming back into society, or a kind of a normal function after kids have been dealing with the pandemic. So are you hearing about any major health concerns?
I think the health concerns that I hear about most frequently within our school system, we've always kind of dealt with a large number of students dealing with asthma coming into our schools. That has been a norm. But I think the primary health concern is really mental health, is what we're seeing, especially coming out of the pandemic. Last school year, coming back into the building for the first time, our numbers of students that express needs for mental health services increased drastically, even in some of our schools where we hadn't seen it before. And so once again, we've expanded our social emotional support services. So we have a trauma sensitive clinician, and these are licensed workers who are appointed to our schools. So we make sure that we have one available in every school now, because our students are demonstrating that they're needing that additional supports. And then we have community partners that help us with some of the things that we're unable to do. So our licensed clinicians that are there are supporting students and families. But once those needs go beyond what we're able to do, we have partners that are lined up to provide additional supports and services. And so once again, that has been a major resource for us. It's been a blessing to us and to our families that we have that additional supports, because once again, coming out of the pandemic, we saw that the need for that increased, but not only for our students, but also for staff. And so we have licensed clinicians there, who are also there to support our staff members.
Yeah, and I know at Central several years ago, they had an in-house person there from Swope Health.
Yes.
That was there in-house talking to the kids and helping them work through some of those mental health issues that are needed. And that's really the foundation, as well as reading and getting a child that is productive in the school system.
That's right, because if they are full of anxiety and worry and stress, that too impacts their ability to learn. Because when you're dealing with a lot of external issues, and if you're hungry or in need of housing or clothing or whatever it might be, or you feel like you're physically in danger, you're not really thinking about what you're learning in the classroom. At that point, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Are you physically safe? Are you psychologically safe? All those things have to be taken care of prior to getting to those growth needs, which are the things that they get when they come into the school setting. But Maslow says that you have to take care of those basic necessities first. And so we can't expect children to come in and learn when they're dealing with all these external issues that are outside of their control, and really puts them in a position of powerlessness. So as schools, as adults, in community, we have to make sure that we are working to eliminate those threats to them, those points of anxiety, those pressure points that children shouldn't have to deal with. We have to make sure we're, number one, identifying them and taking care of them when they come into our schools. And so that's part of what we do with our trauma support teams.
And I agree with you 1,000%. And I think churches should be involved in this. We got a church and a liquor store on every corner in our community.
Absolutely.
And they need to come out of the churches, not the liquor stores. The churches need to come out and be way more involved in what's going on with the kids in their education. So the first 30 days, you have agenda already mapped out on what you're going to do?
I do. I've done a lot already. I was just looking at it last night. I was like, my goodness, I've done a lot already in the first 30 days, but it's been really good work. And really all of it has been just a comprehensive engagement process with a number of stakeholders, community members, with parents, with students, with our staff, of course. And I think the fortunate thing for me is that I'm not learning KCPS, although I am learning new aspects that come with the role. So I've been saying I'm simultaneously listening, learning, and executing, because there's some things I already know that we need to do. And so we're moving forward in those areas that I know we need additional work. Like I said, the area of focus is literacy. I have no question about that. And so I'm not going to waste any time in that area. We have work to do, and every minute that we wait is another minute that is lost for our children. So we're jumping right into that work. But then there are some areas that I was not as privy to, not being in this role, that I'm listening and learning about, and I'm excited about that as well. So I've been extremely busy over these last 30 days.
Well, that's good. And for my last comment as we wrap up, you had a good opening.
Yes, we did. I am so listen. I am so excited.
No issues. Kids getting dropped off on the wrong bus stop or not getting picked up. You had a smooth opening.
We had a smooth opening, and I have to say that is thanks to our leadership team. We have a phenomenal leadership team in KCPS, and we put a lot of intentional work around operations, smooth school start. And we just really focused in on the areas where we had challenges last year. One of those was transportation. We just really focused in. We have a phenomenal executive director of operations, and that is totally his wheelhouse. And he's come in and he's done some major improvements and adjustments in that area. And so we were able to live it, see it, and feel it at the start of this school year. I mean, you always have a few glitches here and there, and we did, but nothing compared to what we have had.
Nothing made the news, the 6 o'clock news.
It was a wonderful, smooth school start, and we are so excited about that. Once again, this is what our families deserve. This is what our children deserve, and we're going to continue to work, because there's always room for improvement. We're going to continue to work to give them the best that we have. That's what I tell our leadership team, that we're here to make sure that we're giving our students and our families the very best that we can give. And if we're not willing to do that, then we shouldn't be here.
That's Dr. Jennifer Collier. She is going to be the superintendent of Kansas City Public Schools. I'm excited for her. I'm excited for the agenda and plans that she has to move the district forward. I forgot one thing.
Okay.
And I have to leave town if I don't do it. VOTEC, construction. How can we get VOTEC training kids for construction? How can we do that?
Well, we can work with our director of CTE and some community partners to help make that happen. I think that's a wonderful area for our students to get involved. There are a lot of opportunities in that area. And so we have expanded our CTE programming over the last few years. So we do have construction, but I think we can do more in that area. So that's a conversation I'll be having with our academic division and our CTE leadership.
Jim Watts and Sam Dowdy. I did ask her.
Yes, you did.
As always, I have the best listening audience in the world. Till next week, remember, tough times don't last, tough people do. Until next time, peace.